With the release of Varlamore came 4 new ranged weapons, and that made me ask a very simple question: are they good or not? Today I want to show you my results after testing those weapons on tons of bosses and maybe even get a few drops in this video. Did range just become the most powerful skill in the game, or are these weapons not worth the money? Well, let's find out. The first weapon I wanted to test out was the Tecu Salamander. The most popular thing I've seen people mention is the combat achievements. There's actually 2 of them where you have to use the Salamander to kill a boss. One is Armadale God Wars and the other is Maspa. Now, I haven't tested it out with any other Salamander, but for a Grandmaster combat achievement it was actually quite easy to complete. If you don't know, it combines 3 weapons into one. You have Abyssal Whip as the melee option, Imbued Magic Shortbow with Rune Arrows as the ranged option, and Warped Scepter as the magic option. The attack cycles are a little bit different, but the DPS is roughly the same. And I must say, it hits quite well. The problem I found is that you require tier 80 stats on all combat styles, and by that time I wonder if it's even worth going for, or should you just upgrade to better weapons instead. I also took it to Paros and my run was actually quite fast. One KC took approximately 3 to 4 minutes, which is pretty average, but the cost to use this weapon is so cheap that you just save so much money on everything else. You don't need to put runes into your trident, you don't need charges on your melee weapons, you don't need arrows, and it works on all 6 brothers quite efficiently. And of course, by the end of the trip it paid off quite well. I guess the Salamander brings you good luck as well. It's actually quite a cheap alternative to training magic, because Iritar is like 15 GP per cast, which is almost nothing. So if you're looking for AFK magic training method, this is much cheaper than casting any spells. I got roughly around 40,000 experience per hour. Do keep in mind I also used full magic setup, so the experience is slightly inflated, but even if you have just occult and imbued cape, the damage increase is already very significant. And finally, one place I can see it being used is against the Revenant bots in the wilderness, because there is no way for a script to predict which combat style you're using. The melee and ranged versions of the Salamander have the best DPS, so I would just stick to that and focus your magic on just freezing, but it's a very efficient way to hunt down bots, and some players even say that the profit goes up to like 7 million GP an hour. So overall, I'm gonna give this weapon 7 out of 10 on usefulness. I think it has a place in the game for some niche activities. You have to keep in mind that it's a 2-handed weapon, which means you lose your shield, and for medium level players, things like God Books, Dragon Defenders, Odium Wards are quite significant in DPS and defense. Still, it's 3 incredible medium level weapons put into one, and the cost of running this weapon is almost non-existent. So if you're lazy like me, you can just knock off 3 grinds with 1 Salamander. Oh, and another thing you can knock off real fast is by subscribing to this channel if you want to see more Varlamore content. The only thing I can promise you is new awesome videos every week. Thank you. The second weapon I tested out was the Tonalztics of Ralos. Now, this is an odd one. Firstly, I bought the weapon for 110 million GP, and later on I sold it for 130 million GP. So I made a happy accident and I got a 20 million GP profit by just testing it out for a day. And today, when I'm editing this video, the price already has gone down to 100 million GP. So it seems to fluctuate a lot because the players can't quite figure out if it's good or not. Well, it's not good. Let me explain. You don't use this weapon as your main weapon. I tried that Armadale, it just doesn't work. The DPS just isn't good enough considering its price range. So what players thought, and I think that's what Jagex was also thinking, is that it's just a ranged version of Dragon Warhammer, because the special attack consumes 50% and it lowers your opponent's defense level based on their magic level. So it really does work on bosses that have higher magic level, and there aren't that many out there. I firstly took it to Saradomin God Wars, and I must say, this is one of the better places to use this, but it made me wonder if I would prefer to have blowpipe spec here for longer trips, or would I have the ralos boomerang for defense reduction? And honestly, I think the answer is still gonna be blowpipe. Sustaining yourself in such long trips has just too much value. Like yeah, I sped up my kills like approximately 5 seconds, which on average also saves you supplies, but the increase in damage to me wasn't as important as the healing from blowpipe. Keep in mind with the current prices, you're spending 100 million GP to get 5-second faster kills. Now what the boomerang did give me was a random Saradomin hilt as a drop, which I guess the luck of this video has to continue. And since the Saradomin Godsword is best spec weapon in Colosseum, the price is also quite high, so I got 43 million GP for it. After that I went to Leviathan, and this is where I thought the weapon is gonna shine the most. It's a ranged boss, has high magic level, this is perfect. I double spec it, lower the defense of Leviathan and go to town. But then I get to the enraged phase of Leviathan and I realize I don't have my web weaver bow with me, which is probably the most satisfying thing about Leviathan. And that actually made me sad, because I was really hoping hoping for the boomerang to shine here, but I just think when it comes to spending your special attack, the web weaver is still so much better here. Skipping final 20% of the fight is always gonna be better than reducing the defense a little bit. Unironically, I think the best place for the boomerang was a giant mole, which I thought was hilarious. You don't need to heal with the blowpipe, you don't need to use special attack for KO potential, you just lower the defense and mole dies really fast. But that's the thing, giant mole already dies really fast. It has 200 hit points, which is literally 4 arrows with a twisted bow. Again, you speed up the kill by like 5 seconds, which is nice, but is it worth buying at 100 million GP? I think not. You can't use it in Tombs of a Mascot because the defensive levels are so much better reduced with flat reduction rather than percentage reduction the boomerang offers. There is no point bringing it to Inferno because I'd rather have that extra inventory space for supplies than specking suck twice. There's no point bringing it to Nex because you can't lower Nex's defensive stats, and I guess you can bring it to Chambers for the Olm head, but everyone who has done Chambers knows that the final head phase is literally the least of your worries for the entire raid. When you start scaling Chambers, then it becomes harder, but the same question happens again. Do I want to sacrifice an inventory space for this one very specific scenario? The reality I found out was that everywhere you want to bring this weapon, the Dragon Warhammer just does a much better job. And I understand, it's not supposed to replace Dragon Warhammer, but rather lower the defense levels of monsters you can't access with melee. But every place for that is just not worth the inventory space it takes up. It never gave me that massive boost in damage I was looking for, and since my special attacks during raids or any other boss are so important, I'd rather keep it for things that are must like Blowpipe, Panda Scott Sword, Kerry's Partisan, Dragon Warhammer and so on. That being said, it does okay on monsters where the Twisted Bow also works, because both of them work off monsters' magic levels. So overall, I'm gonna give this weapon a 3 out of 10 on usefulness. It reminds me a little bit of Soul Reaper Axe, an expensive weapon that just doesn't quite fit into the game yet, but maybe in the future it will find a place, and that's when the rating of the weapon will also go up. Okay, the next weapon I have for you is the Sunlight Hunter's crossbow, and for that weapon I have a complete opposite opinion. I absolutely love it. My immediate thought was a medium level player trying to complete fight caves, so I took out my handy dandy black tea hide and went to test it out, and it works really well. I think it's an extremely good alternative to imbued magic shortbow and rune crossbow. In fact, I think it's so good that every new Iron Man should completely abandon the winter dot meta that you do at the start of your account, and instead they should get 99 Hunter, because I genuinely believe that's more beneficial for newer accounts in so many ways. And actually, I have a full video coming out in a few days explaining that. But back to the crossbow, if you have the option, I would definitely consider using this in the fight caves. It's cheap, it's reliable, it has so much DPS, and it's quite easy to get. I literally went AFK for 6 minutes during my run, and I watched the movie on my second screen, and I still managed to get a 50-minute timer. Now, I wouldn't expect the same from a medium level player, but it's definitely better than using Kareli's crossbow or rune crossbow during your runs. I also tried to test it out on some lower level monsters like Scurious, and it just doesn't miss. I think there was a point where I hit like 20 times in a row without missing. It's extremely good as a pseudo blowpipe for any early Iron Man accounts before you actually get the blowpipe. The 3 attack cycle on the weapon makes it very satisfying to use. I think good comparison for DPS wise is imbued magic shortbow with amethyst arrows, except this one is so much easier to obtain. You only need 72 Hunter and 74 Fletching. And finally, the only place I didn't test it out is PvP, which this weapon has a very comfortable place in. There are PKs out there who can really take advantage of this because it gives ghost movement, which is particularly good against melee fighters. It's a technique where you move around, spazzing out on your character, and your opponent has a hard time tracking your movements. The 3 attack cycle allows the weapon to shine for some very impressive combo attacks. So overall, I will give this weapon 8 out of 10 for usefulness. It's one of the best options if you're a medium level player and you need that really good range weapon before you get the blowpipe. Okay, and the final weapon I want to talk about is the Eclipse Atlatl. The TLDR of this weapon is that it's a range-based weapon that works off your melee strength. And immediately a few light bulbs went off in my head. My first thought was demonic gorillas. No longer you have to bring range switches here. You can just camp melee armor with the Atlatl as your ranged weapon. Since the damage of this weapon works based off your melee strength, you can also use super combat potions to increase your damage even further, which means you don't even have to bring ranging potions anymore. The second place a light bulb went off in my head was Tombs of a Mascot. You see, with the Tumek and Shera, the entire raid revolves around using only magic and melee, and since the Atlatl works off your melee like gear, you can completely abandon any range gear you have, and that saves you on tons of inventory space. There are 3 places in raid you need to use range. The first is Baba's boulders, which this works wonders. You don't even need to pot, you don't even need to use sprayers, it always one-shots the boulders no matter what, which is really nice. Just one-way switch and you're good to go. The second place is during Aka's fights. Now, I had a problem here because I did a few raids and every time I just kill Akka so fast with the butterfly method that I didn't even have a chance to truly test it out here. This was like peak first world problem. My gear was so good that I didn't even need to use the Atlatl. The best I got was like 10 seconds of range attack and then back to butterfly we go. But I guess that's the entire point. You want to use as little ranged attacks as possible, so in this case it kinda worked out. The final part for using ranged is P2 Warden, and it was okay. Like obviously if you bring on full ranged gear it's gonna be so much better, and I'm not even arguing against that. But if you're looking to save on inventory space to get those extra supplies, this is a godsend item. I brought like 5 or 6 pros with me to the raid, which I realized I didn't actually need, so in a sense bringing a 5-way switch to ranged would have been much better for me. But if you're doing mage and melee Doa only, I would highly recommend bringing this weapon. It saves you so much brain power and you don't have to constantly think about 7-way switches for just few seconds of DPS. And of course, by the end of the raid I got rewarded for my efforts and saw a juicy yummy purple light at the end of the room. But unfortunately it was just a shiny yellow ring. Never lucky. But like I said, that was with melee armor. I wanted to see how this weapon works with Eclipse armor, and it was okay. Honestly, I wouldn't bring it to anywhere as my main DPS option. It works fine, but that's about it. At Salra, you only want to bring it as your range option. You still need to bring double switches for magic, because it doesn't quite have that DPS like Bofa does. But if you're an Iron Man and you absolutely despise gauntlets, it is a decent alternative to getting the Bofa and crystal armor. It's not as good, but it also could save you like 200 hours of gauntlet grind. And what this armor and weapon does is allow you to take different pathways before you get to the end game, instead of just being forced into the gauntlet. It's a nice balance between places where blowpipe just doesn't work that effectively and places where Bofa is overkill. And again, this has become the theme of this video, which is that this weapon can be used in PvP. And that's because of one reason, the bleed effect the armor gives. It's not the most reliable source of damage, but when you get the creme de la creme of the bleed and use the special attack, it absolutely slaps. So overall, I will give this weapon a 7 out of 10. When you compare it to something like full Carols, this one is so much better. In conclusion, if you're thinking of making a new account and you need the direction to go for, just go to Varlamore and do all the content there, because the rewards you get from the place are really good. If you want to see more Varlamore content, make sure to subscribe, but that's it from me. I'll see you all tomorrow with another video. I love you all very much. Bye.